Welcome to Vibrant Publishers podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to share their insights and knowledge with our listeners. Today, we are joined by Dr. Michael Walsh, who is an esteemed author of Vibrant Publishers. He has authored the book Human Resource Analytics Essential by Vibrant Publishers. Dr. Michael Walsh is an industrial and organizational psychologist with over 15 years of human resource and people analytics experience. Michael currently leads the Workforce Analytics and Insights at Eaton. He also teaches a human resource analytics course for master's level student at University of Illinois. Previously, Michael's passion for people analytics landed him at Bloomberg and Fiat Chrysler automobiles, where he started and led the global people strategy analytics and people analytics and insight functions, respectively. Michael began his professional career as a client-facing consultant for Mercer's human capital practice, focused on HR strategy, organizational design, development, and human capital analytics. Michael worked for Mercer in Chicago, Dubai, and New York. His master's degree is in human resource and industry relations from University of Illinois, and his PhD is in industrial and organizational psychology. Michael, welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So, with your extensive background and expertise in human resource and people analytics, could you please share with us what initially drew you to this field and what inspired you to specialize in it?
Yeah. So you mentioned in the intro in my bio, I started my career in client-facing consulting. And when I first started out, I was involved in Mercer's human capital practice. And underneath that umbrella, they had a very kind of niche-y, bespoke capital analytics and workforce analytics. And it was really quite leading edge at the time when I started, and people weren't necessarily talking about workforce analytics, certainly as broad as they are. I just saw the power of HR through that experience working with that team, with that group. And I think that for me, really the light bulbs started to go on simply because in human resources, we sit on a massive amount of data that we don't do anything with. And so similar to marketing functions of the past who collected all sorts of data about what people say and what they're going to do and things, and then they realize, well, they don't actually do those things. Similar in human resources, we collect a lot of information anecdotally about people, whether it be through exit interviews or exit surveys, or engagement surveys or onboarding surveys. All of these things we collect data, but it's all self-reported data. And when we take a look at the self-reported data versus the actual data and what actually happens in someone's career, oftentimes there's a disconnect there. And so figuring out what is that disconnect, how can we make better decisions based on those data, seeing kind of clients or customers' eyes light up when we tell them kind of what's actually going on within the organization, and then enabling them, most importantly, enabling them to make decisions based on those data is really where I got excitement from. And it's like a puzzle. Every single day is different, and every single day you're trying to solve problems and put together a puzzle, and I just find that to be a lot of fun.
Right. And personally, which one do you find more fun, or as in more inspired to do? Does teaching inspire you more, or does working in an industry inspire you more?
Oh, that is a tough question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before. I get energy from both because I think part of my job, I really view my role in both places to bring academia and the real world or industry together. And I think that's the beauty of industrial organizational psychology as well as a field, as a degree and a specialty, is that we really sit between these two areas and we use academic research in the real world to make a difference in the real world. And so teaching, I love teaching. I love seeing students' faces light up when they learn something new and when they're understanding what's going on and they figure out how they can apply that to their lives and their work. And on the other side, I love bringing in maybe more academic and research-based findings to the industry and helping us to slow down and think about what we're doing in a very mindful way. So which one is more fun? I think they're both just as fun, just in different ways. And I really see.
Okay, great. So now could you please explain what HR analytics is and mention the key takeaways from your book?
Yeah, sure. So HR analytics is such a broad topic, and I define it in the book as using data that we collect on people to make business decisions. Again, very, very broad topic, because if you ask 12 different organizations, you'll probably get 13 answers about what HR
Yeah,
analytics actually is and what it means and what they're doing with it. And that was very intentional, because as I view HR analytics, and this is one of the takeaways from the book, as I view HR analytics, it's certainly a spectrum of where an organization could fall on that spectrum. And so you have very basic analytics, reporting, those types of things on one end. And on the other end, you have, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, those kinds of things that some organizations are dabbling with now. And then on the other axis, and what I've talked about in the book is, and I think that's good, because I think organizations need to go on that journey, and you need to figure out where is your organization addressing the issues. Because if you have an organization who is very, very basic and you're trying to do super advanced analytics, it's not going to work, because they need to trust in the data and things. And there's a process that you need to go through before you
yeah,
get to that other end. And I've made that mistake before, come into organizations and tried to do the most advanced type analytics. And when people don't believe in the data or the integrity of the data that are going into those analyses, then it's really hard to make conclusions based on the analysis you've done. So it is a journey, and you've got to take small steps along the way. And then the other piece in the book, so I put together a 2x2 matrix in the book, and it's all about where is your organization and where are you as an individual? Because organizations can't read a book, individuals can. So I had to put in another axis to say, look, where are you on this matrix, and where can you be most effective? And so as you think about your own personal skills, you're either very basic or pretty advanced. And so as you marry those two axes together, you come up with some intersections and some ideas on where you can add the most value. And so if you are very advanced in analytics, but your organization is very basic, then you need to help to bring the organization along. If you are very basic and your organization is very advanced, then you can learn from other people in the organization. And so the really the crux of that whole piece of the book, and I touched on it in the first chapter, and then we revisit it in the last. And so bringing your skills in different ways and different manners to meet the organization where it is, and ultimately that's where you're going to add the most value. And so there's a quiz in the book that talks all about that and can
yeah,
help you plot that and things. So I think that's one key takeaway. The book also gets into some technical aspects of HR analytics, and
yeah,
I do everything in Excel, because honestly, the target audience for this book was not advanced analytics practitioners, although I do think they might be able to get a few nuggets from the book. So please go out and buy it too if you're an
yeah,
advanced practitioner. But the primary audience for this book was really HR generalists and HR folks who are sitting locally, supporting a group of people who may know some basics in Excel. They're not going to have statistical packages installed on their computers simply because they don't need it, and probably don't know how to use it because it's been years since they learned SPSS or R or whatever the case may be. So we've done everything in Excel, which I think makes it very accessible to the audience. And so there is some technical stuff in the book, and we walk through case studies. So each chapter takes a functional area within HR and looks at a case study. So for example, there's a recruiting case study, and there's a succession planning case study. And with the companion materials that are available on the website, you can go and download Excel spreadsheets and work through the case studies as well. And so provides a really practical way to marry some of those concepts that are really theoretical in some places, and bring them down to real life and allow you to play with the data and fumble around in Excel. And that's really how I've seen my students learn the best, to be honest. And so lots of case studies, lots of critical thinking involved, asking the right questions, those kinds of
Right.
things too.
Great. I think that answer will give a lot of insights and perspective to the audience. And this shows that you should definitely grab the HR Analytics book as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to know, this was the part where you said, where you explained why HR Analytics is important and all organizations must have HR Analytics. They must make use of it. But how do they measure the effectiveness of HR Analytics?
Yeah, this is a really great question as well, because I think a lot of times people assume that if they have an analytics function, even if that function is doing some very advanced modeling and predictions and things, I think people assume that those things are making a difference.
Right.
And we don't, if you don't measure what you're doing,
Yeah.
this goes back to one of the first tenets of my perspective in terms of HR analytics, which is even the interventions that we do from an analytics perspective, we have to measure the impact of those. And so if we're not, let's say we do a predictive turnover model. So we're predicting, what are the antecedents of someone leaving within an organization? If we don't measure a year later or 2 years later, did our model actually predict those people who we think would leave? Then we don't know how effective that model is. And so we have to go back retrospectively and ask ourselves, are the interventions we're making, are the recommendations we're making based on our analysis making an impact? And so just the other day, I had a meeting with somebody who said, the project that we did a few years ago resulted in the lowest turnover we had in the organization. And that was, wonderful to hear in terms of, feedback directly to me about a project that I had done a few years ago. And so it's really those measurements that we need to take with anything we do. And even if it's things like reporting, how many users are using the report that we put out, or dashboards? How many people are accessing those dashboards, and what are they doing with them, and those kinds of things. And it doesn't have to be necessarily hard and fast metrics. I mean, oftentimes talking to the end users gives you a really good sense of how things are going and if what you are doing is making an impact. And so I try to push myself and my teams to measuring actual business outcomes based on the analysis that we do. That's really, really hard because there are other things that impact our business outcomes and all these kinds of things. However, I still try to push towards, can we measure the outcome on our business? If you can't get there, go to the next best thing, which is talking to the end users, talking to the people who are using your outputs, your dashboards, your reports, et cetera, and get some anecdotal feedback. And I think those are both great ways to get feedback.
Right. Thank you. Now, in this age of AI, and now that ChatGPT 4 has come out and everyone is on it, so what do you think, what role does technology play in human resource analytics, and what are the next emerging trends that you see in this area?
Yeah, this is something that's really coming really fast down the track. And I don't know that anyone could have predicted how fast ChatGPT and these other things could have come online and been adopted so quickly. And I really do think technology as a whole is going to change. It has changed the way that we think about analytics. And so data, when we think about data democratization and putting data in the hands of the people who need it in order to make decisions every day, technology plays a huge role in that. And so providing, like I mentioned before, the dashboards and the scorecards and things for HR managers, as well as line leaders who are making decisions about their people every single day, really important things. And we can't do that. HR analytics practitioners and HR practitioners need to ask themselves when it comes to those types of technologies is, what does my business need? And again, it's all about how do you meet the business where they are? So do we need a technology that can do the fanciest dashboards and predictive modeling within the technology and all these things? Or do we need something basic where people can understand their headcount and how many people they have in the organization and how many people left and what does our inclusion and diversity look like, and those types of things. Those are the questions that I think we grapple with in that space. When it comes to AI, as I mentioned before, I think that is just completely unknown at this
Yeah.
stage, simply because of the rapid uptake of the technology. And I'm not sure that we know yet where that is going. And I've seen some really neat and cool demos in terms of things AI being worked into, whether it be Google products or Microsoft products or spreadsheets and things, where you could type, it could be a massive spreadsheet full of information. You could type, give me some insights in this spreadsheet, and it spits out charts and graphs and tells you a narrative about what's going on and those types of things. But there will always still need to be a human who looks at those outputs text that I'm working in. And we can't tell AI, I mean, we could, but AI is still being built in terms of the context under which we're doing the analysis. And that is so critical to being successful in HR analytics.
Yeah.
I could do an analysis in one organization and it could be a home run and it could be great and everybody would love it and they'd take action. I could do the same analysis in a different organization and it would fall flat and it would mean nothing and nobody would do anything with it and it would sit on a shelf. And really the difference would be the context of the organization and where the organization is headed and, the overall strategy of the organization, what kind of skills they're trying to attract and these types of things. And so can we feed that information into a chat GPT or an AI? Yeah, we could, but there still does need to be that human layer
Involvement.
and the human pass. And I think the other piece of it is AI can help us to get better and more efficient at our job. And so whether that be writing code for a specific thing or coming up with ideas for interventions that we could take after we've done the analysis or some quick wins that we could get with the business. I mean, that we can certainly use it. I'm not suggesting that we don't use it because I think it's a great tool, as long as we use it responsibly and are taking that context into play. But some of the things I've seen, for example, so this is not related to HR analytics, but an example of AI. My wife and I both just did just for fun. It was like $9 or something. Got this app where you upload a bunch of pictures and then it changes your pictures and puts them in different places and it's all done with an algorithm through AI. And my wife, her pictures turned out great. She looked amazing and it was all in different outfits and all these kinds of things. And it was great. And it wasn't just her face. Like they had changed her face and, moved it around, things like that. But some of these really looked like her and it was great. So instead of going out and getting a professional headshot and all these things and spending a ton of money, she can now use some of these pictures on LinkedIn or whatever it may be. I did the same thing, uploaded the pictures and got them back, and they looked nothing like me. It was like a completely different human. It was horrible. And so this is the difference. We did it at the same time of day. We did it and all these things. And so one person has a great outcome, another person has a not so great outcome. And so, yes, the algorithms are still learning and training and all these kinds of things. But this is the point, is that we need to let AI learn and kind of bake a little bit more. And I think it really comes down to the end user and are we using it responsibly and are we using it in a manner that makes sense to the organization?
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. Now, I would like to ask you a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is,
Yeah.
first of all, could you explain this topic to our audience and how HR analytics can contribute to DEI within the organization?
Yeah, sure. So DE&I is, again, a very big and important topic. And I'll just touch really quickly on my perspective in the book. And then, well, let's define it first, and then we'll talk about it. So really, diversity, equity, and inclusion are three very much interrelated topics in my mind. And so diversity is really looking at the population of your workforce, and do you have diverse perspectives within the organization, whether that be, oftentimes this is in the form of measuring ethnicity, measuring gender, those veteran status in the United States. In the US, we measure those things very much we ask people to self-identify when they apply for roles and those kinds of things. The rest of the world doesn't measure those things as rigorously as we do in the US, but the same kind of idea is that we're trying to get broad perspectives within the organization. And those perspectives come from living different lives and having different personal characteristics and going through life with those characteristics and experiencing life differently and bringing those experiences into your work. So that's kind of the diversity piece, which is, the easiest, I would say, to quantify from an HR analytics perspective, because we can count the number of men we have, we can count the number of women we have, and we can divide those by the total population, and we have a percentage, and we can say, okay, we have X percentage of women, and we can monitor that number, and we can see, is that going up or down, and we can make changes in our policies, programs, et cetera, based on that. Equity is the piece all around our people being treated fairly within the organization. Yeah. Typically, this has to do with monetary rewards. And so our men, for example, being paid the same for women, or the same as women, for doing the same work in the same job with the same tenure, the same experience, et cetera. And I do a whole section in the book on equity and how oftentimes equity is a place that gets headlines quite a bit because those are easy-ish numbers to calculate. And so we can say, on average, if we take all of our men in the organization, we take all of the women in the organization, and we calculate average pay rates for each of those, we can say men make X% more than women, which makes a big headline and it makes a big splash. And it's certainly something to look into. The problem with doing that kind of broad-based sweep is not looking at things like job type, tenure, experience before they got the job, all these kinds of things. And when you control for those types of things, oftentimes, is there still a gender pay gap? Sometimes there is, but it oftentimes gets very, very small. And so do adjustments need to happen? Oftentimes, yes, but sometimes no. And so those are the areas where HR analytics can really play a role in the equity piece, is really understanding what is the real difference once we control for those other aspects of the employment relationship. And then finally, inclusion is, do I feel like I am part of the team? So this is a very personal measure to each individual within the organization. Do I feel like my voice is heard? Do I feel like I have a voice at the table? Am I able to be my full self at work and be included in the decisions that are being made within the organization, is how I would define it. We gather that information through, and those are typically done through engagement surveys or onboarding surveys, exit surveys, those kinds of things. And HR analytics certainly plays a role in analyzing those data, understanding are we asking the right questions on the survey? What are we getting back from the surveys, those kinds of things. And so that's kind of how I would define each of those, talk about how HR analytics plays a role. And then when we think about the book, so I mentioned the equity piece within the book. Yeah. I intentionally did not talk about diversity and inclusion in the book. And I make a note about that in the book as well, because my point of view is that diversity and inclusion should be a part of every single analysis we ever do. And so if we're not including those variables in our analysis, or if we're not looking at those things, if we're publishing a dashboard, that's where we're falling short. So I make the assumption in the book that we're going to do that for everything. It shouldn't be a special one-off project here or a one-off project there. That doesn't give it the weight that it should have within organizations. I think this should be something that we're talking about all the time and figuring out, are we doing the right things? How are we getting those diverse perspectives? How are we understanding if people are feeling included? So very, very specifically and intentionally in the book, I did not touch on that because, that could be a series of books that are written. And I made the assumption that people are already looking at that stuff within their organization.
Okay, got it. That gives a good insight on the DEI and how important it is for the industry. I think all the companies, they shouldn't compromise on this aspect because of how big a role it plays.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think the important piece here is that, we're thinking about the term perspective broadly. And so whether that be, you're talking to people from different countries or who are different ethnicities or genders or religions or all sorts of other things that give people different perspective. It's so critical within the organization. I think we need to put a really big focus on that for sure.
Okay, got it, got it. So now I would like to ask you the common misconceptions or myths about human resource analytics, and how can they be reduced in the company?
Yeah, sure. So with HR analytics specifically, I think one of the myths certainly that I fight on a regular basis is that we're going to come up with a silver bullet and that there is a one thing that will change the way that we're doing, maybe it's DE&I, and we're gonna do an analysis, and these golden nuggets are just going to start falling from the sky, and we're going to be able to capitalize on some of those things. And I think sometimes we find things that the organization doesn't know about, and sometimes we give the organization an insight that hasn't been talked about or hasn't been noticed. A lot of the time, we bring the organization confirmation of something that they may have already known. And so if you have really good executives, senior leaders and leaders within the organization, leaders within HR who understand the business, who understand the people within their business, good managers, those types of things, oftentimes they have a gut feeling about what's going on within the organization, and they're able to articulate those things. And so this is why in the work that I do, and I encourage all of my students to do this and my team certainly to do this as well. Before you start any project and diving into the data, we sit with our stakeholders and we do a hypothesis generation. And we say, okay, what do you think is going on here? And help us understand more from your perspective what's going on. And so we're probably not going to bring a silver bullet, but what we can do is bring you some data that will maybe back up what you think is happening, and we can brainstorm then on some interventions that could help you solve the problem that you're trying to solve. And like I said, sometimes we do bring the golden nuggets and people say, wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea that was going on within my organization. And that's such a detailed look. I would never have thought about looking in that area, or I had no idea that that was having such a big impact here, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes we certainly do bring those things, but oftentimes, especially if we're basing our analysis in academic foundations and those types of things, these things are known within the organization. So that's one big thing. I think the other thing is when people see numbers, they automatically think that it's going to be super precise, very much detailed to the nth decimal point. Oftentimes the analysis that we do, because we're dealing with people, we're not dealing with widgets that we're creating that are coming off of a manufacturing production line. We're dealing with people, and we make decisions every single day that may or may not align to what we've done in the past. And so when we do an analysis based on the data that we have, things that have already happened, we're basing the future on those things that have already happened. And as people, we may make different decisions. I drive to work this way one day and another way another day. And so I'm making that decision every single day. And so as people, that's the same with our employment relationship, and we make different decisions every single day. And I tell people, we vote with our feet every day when we're in an organization. Do we come back to work or do we quit and go somewhere else? And so that's kind of our vote. Every day we make that decision. And so I think people think that when we have data, we're going to be able to predict or name to a decimal point what's going to happen. And we simply can't do that. Oftentimes our analysis is directional and we bake in error. That's why we use the statistical methods that we do oftentimes, because those are able to capture what is the error in the data that we have, and how do we apply that to then looking forward and those types of things. And so I talk about that in the book as well, and how do you apply those things to predictions. And with that comes, marrying of the art and the science. And so when we do a predictive model, for example, there is a lot of science built into that and some really heavy analysis and statistics, but there's also an art piece. And again, it's all about that context. And so if we have something that comes out of a model that's statistically significant or not statistically significant, and it means something to the organization or doesn't, we still may need to talk about that variable and how does that make a difference in those types of things. And so there is a balance of that art and science, and we have to marry those things and make those decisions every single day. So I think that's the number two myth. And number three, I think, is the speed at which we can do things. And so oftentimes people data is super messy. And so the amount of effort it takes to clean those data, understand those data, transform those data into something that can be analyzed takes an inordinate amount of time, something that oftentimes stakeholders in the end aren't prepared for. And so we may start an analysis and they say, okay, well, how long is it going to take? We say, well, it's going to take 6 weeks. And they say, 6 weeks? Oh my goodness. I thought all you had to do was download some data and put it into Excel and do a pivot table and give me the, oftentimes that's not the answer. And so the data integrity is really, really important. And so especially when it comes to people data, it can be very, very messy and those types of things. So I think those are the three big things, myths when it comes to people analytics that come top of mind for sure. When it comes to the HR function, I think, I'm not sure if it's a myth or not, but I would just encourage HR people and business leaders, and it's directly related to HR analytics. I don't know how many times I hear in a week, HR people didn't get into HR because they like data, or HR people aren't good at data, or it's like people have given up before they've even tried. And yes, you may intuitively not think that you like spreadsheets, and you may have a hard time working in Excel, and it may be a hard thing for you to grasp, and statistics might have been hard for you in school and those kinds of things. But once I've seen it happen live with my students, go from I'm not good at analytics to I love analytics because they found a way to apply analytics to what they're doing. And again, it goes back to that first point that I made, which is you have to meet your organization where it is. And it is such a powerful thing to take even some basic reporting in Excel, or some, doing a pivot table or figuring out how to write a formula. When that light bulb goes on, that person is a believer for the rest of their life. And it is like a hockey stick, it just, people love it. And their excitement gets, they get much more excited, and it just becomes this thing. And you can tell that the lens through which they view work changes. And that is such a fun thing to see as a professor, as a teacher. And in the real world, that's fun too, because we're immediately able to apply those insights into the real world and start to make a difference and make decisions. And so the big misconception, I think, if we boil it down, is that HR people are bad at math. And that's, can HR people as a whole work on their math skills? Yes, but that's maybe, everybody could, but I can teach math. That's easy. That's easy to teach. I think the hard part, which HR people have in spades, is asking those critical questions and understanding what question are we really trying to answer with the analysis that we're doing. And so when you can marry that HR person's organizational savvy and understanding of the organization with those math skills and with those analytics, that can be really, really, really powerful. And so with that said, I would encourage all HR people to go out and learn how to use Excel and understand.
So regarding the misconception about HR analytics and how sometimes data can take up to 6 weeks, to process, do you think AI would play a role in minimizing that time?
It sure could, potentially. I think it depends on, how comfortable the organization is giving their data to AI, and,
Yeah. The privacy issue comes in.
how is it accessed, who can see it, all these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, I think AI certainly could play a role in cleaning the data and doing some of those tasks for sure, and automating some of those things for sure. Yeah.
Right. Great.
But
Now,
again, it's a huge unknown.
right. Got it. And thank you for sharing your knowledge on the HR analytics world. Now, I would like to know a little bit about your experience as an author. What is the most
Yeah, sure.
valuable lesson that you have learned as an author and you would like to share with aspiring first-time authors, especially?
Yeah, um I think there are two. And I know you said the most valuable, which means one. I know that because I work in analytics. But I'm going to give you two. So again, you said one, but I'm going to give three. So it's
Yeah.
tough to sit down and write a book is hard. You can't just sit down and write a book. It takes a lot of time and effort. And luckily for me, I did mine fairly quickly after I had done my dissertation for my PhD. And so I was used to writing a lot and researching a lot and putting my thoughts down on paper. And, I had already carved out a time in my day every day to come down here to my office in my house and write for several hours every night. After my kids were in bed, I would come down and write. And so it's difficult. And thank goodness that I have a very, very supportive wife, and she supported my efforts and both my PhD and my book. And I think if I didn't, I think it could have taken a toll on your family life and all these things, because it is labor intensive. It takes a long time. And so
Right.
I think you need to prepare yourself to sit down and write that. I think you need to prepare those people around you and your support network, and you need to have a really good, strong support network as well as you go through these iterations and writing and those kinds of things. Number two, it it was a lot more vulnerable. I found myself being a lot more vulnerable than I thought I would be. So you work so hard to put these words down on paper, and you go through the iterations and the back and forth and the edits and the revisions and all these things, and you finally get the manuscript to a place where you're happy and you're ready to submit and it's ready to publish. And that is such an exciting time. It is,
Right.
one of the most exciting things that I've what
Yeah, you can go
can you hear me
on.
okay? Oh, okay. So that's one of the most exciting things that I've experienced is getting the go ahead to publish. And yes, we're moving forward. And um, then comes a sense of vulnerability. You're putting this thing out there in the world on Amazon for people to buy, read, comment on, critique, tell you, yes, some people will say you did a great job, but other people will tell you areas where you should have done a better job. And that is a very vulnerable situation. So you have to be prepared to put yourself out there with this work that has your name all over it, and allow people to give you feedback. And so if you're not comfortable with that, I would say this is probably not the path for you, because it is literally out there for anyone to read. Um,
Right.
and the third part is, you know, if I were to flip through my book again today, I'm sure I will find places where there's a missing period, or I should have said something a different way, or I think we're always our own self biggest critic.
Right.
And that's why I haven't gone through it. I haven't read the book since it's been published because I don't want to see those things, and I don't want to know, like, what should I have said differently and those kinds of things. So, um, you know, if and when there's a second edition, I will go through and change those things and read the book and all these kinds of things. But I think that's the third piece, which is it's never going to be 100% perfect, and the way, because if you go back and read it again, you're gonna wish you said something differently, or wrote something slightly differently or whatever the case may be. So some of this stuff you have to take it 95% and trust that the publisher, in this case Vibrant, is going to do the right thing and has read the book and is comfortable with where it's at. So some of this has to do with trust in your partner, which is your publisher, and truly knowing that they have your best interests at heart and are working to make your book the best that it can be as well.
Right. And so a follow-up question on that, how was your experience with publishing with us? And if you could provide a feedback on your experience.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I don't think that there was a bad part. I mean, like I said, it was more work than I thought it would be, and there was a lot of back and forth. But first of all, I think I would say about working with Vibrant was willing to take a risk on a no-name first-time author like me. I mean, I'd never written a book before.
Yeah.
And I had chopped my idea around a little bit and gotten rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. And Vibrant was willing to take a risk and willing to take a bet on me as an author. And clearly through your standard process and vetting and all of these kinds of things, okayed my authorship. And after that, it was everything was really kind of smooth sailing. I thought the feedback that I got in the manuscript from the first couple iterations was very valid and really great. I think the marketing that you all have done and getting it up on Amazon and doing all of the back end work in terms of the cataloging and all that kind of stuff has been seamless and really quite easy. So I would encourage anyone, if they have an idea for something that might fit into your library of offerings, submit an idea request form and see how it goes. I think I had a lot of creative control over my book and the manuscript as well, which doesn't always happen when you're working with a publisher. And so I really appreciated that too. I could strike the right tone that I wanted within my book, and I could write what I thought was appropriate for the audience. And Vibrant trusted me to do that. And that was very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you so much for your kind words. And we're also very grateful to have you as an author. And thank you for sharing the valuable insights on the world of HR analytics. And we wish you all the best for your upcoming projects, and we hope to publish more books with you in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And the book HR Analytics is live, so grab your copy now. And thank you, Michael, for your time.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.